I'm sorry, I can't hear you very well. Can you hold it closer to your...
Yeah. Congrats for writing this book in the midst of your busy schedule.
Thank you.
But towards the end, you have written 4 flaws of Dr. Ambedkar. 4 flaws. First of all, 4 flaws of Dr. Ambedkar.
Yes.
You have mentioned his apathy towards scheduled tribes, Adivasis. Mm-hmm. And second, also concerned with that, his disagreement with Gandhiji and all that. So you have quoted some portions of his speech also. Mm-hmm. Was it in the context of improving their lot? After narrating, Dr. Ambedkar wanted to improve their lot because
yes.
One whole chapter in Annihilation of Caste is dedicated to scheduled tribes. And there he finds fault with the Hindus for not showing brotherhood. And he criticizes Hindus for having that casteist attitude.
Quite true.
So I think you have mentioned that criticism of Hinduism to be unfair. And I would like to know opinion of Dr. Mungekar also on that, whether you agree with that criticism first and second.
No, I wanted at the same time to acknowledge that as a human being, every one of us has flaws, and there were some things that could be legitimately critiqued. I rejected the criticisms of Dr. Ambedkar that had been made by, for example, Arun Shoury's famous book, Worshipping False Gods, because I felt that those had been unfair, and I've explained in the book why. And certainly those who suggest that he gets an undeserved share of credit for the Constitution are completely overlooking the points that Justice Lokur and I have made. So all those criticisms I don't accept. I said the 4 that have some legitimacy are the ones I've mentioned. One is that indeed he said a few unkind things about the Adivasis, and you can see this in his Constituent Assembly contribution. Yes, he wanted them to be improved, but he saw them as kind of primitive savages in a way that today you would find somewhat demeaning. Second, I talked about his relative ungraciousness towards Mahatma Gandhi. His political differences with Mahatma Gandhi and economic differences were totally justifiable, and they're legitimate differences between 2 great individuals who had different views of India. But I felt that the manner in which he spoke of and behaved towards Mahatma Gandhi, including at his death and afterwards, was, I thought, unworthy. Thirdly, I've talked about his rather sweepingly unkind statements about Hinduism, in that they were very often, he had this occasional tendency, as people of passion do, to express sweeping generalizations. And so he said things, he himself had a very subtle intellect. He didn't need to just sweepingly denounce the religion in some of his statements, which he did. And so I've pointed those out, because those, frankly, a man of his intellect could have qualified a little more rather than denouncing the entire faith, because there's many more aspects to the faith that were overlooked in his denunciation. And then finally, of course, is this question of centralization that Dr. Mungekar has already replied to. I do believe that he had a very strong set of reasons to reject the village as the unit of it. He felt it was a sinkhole of discrimination and iniquity and so on, that therefore you needed a strong central government to try and pull sort of backward, as it were, in terms of social attitudes, villages into modernity. But some of our legitimate interests in decentralization, which many years after his death came through in the amendments to the Constitution that gave us Panchayati Raj, for example, those I think we all would welcome as very constructive developments today, in the context of building them upon his already having tried to break through the barriers of discrimination and untouchability and so on. But with that, decentralization is a good thing in a vast country like ours. We shouldn't be a place where every decision is taken in Delhi, whether in my party or in the country as a whole. That has been one of my themes. So those are my 4 substantive critiques, and I stand by them. We can go into further detail. Certainly on Adivasis, he also had sensible, good things to say. And he certainly he wants everyone to progress. He's, in that sense, very much a product of the Enlightenment. He's somebody who wants to see progress and development benefiting everybody. But I thought that his manner of writing about them and addressing their problems was unfortunately a bit patronizing, and that is something which comes across. Dr. Mamkekar, please feel free to disagree with me.
Of the four flaws that you have mentioned, his position with respect to Adivasis is incomprehensible. It cannot be justified, because what he thought about Adivasis, general Hindu community was thinking about the untouchables and depressed classes. That's why he loses there so far his position vis-a-vis Adivasi is concerned. But remaining three things, that flaws that Dr. Tharoor you are talking about, I think they need to be dealt with. I am happy that you brought them to the fore, but they need to be little thoroughly examined. See, he was not intellectual that writing thousands of pages. He was practical politician. And he was engaged with Gandhiji so far polemical debate. He was extremely harsh toward Gandhiji. And your argumentation should not have been that much harsh. But Ambedkar was engaged in war with Gandhi.
But after Gandhiji's death, he did
No,
not.
that is one. No. See, when he married Savita Kabir, he said that had today Bapuji would have been there, he would have been bless me. This is he appreciated
Because
that.
Gandhiji was a big supporter of intercaste
Absolutely.
marriage.
When Pune passed, Gandhiji went on 20th September 1932 and continued to 23rd of September. P.N. Rajboji asked later, and categorically Ambedkar said that my differences with Gandhi notwithstanding, I must admit that he brought the issue of untouchability for the first time to the national fore. It's not that he was always harsh, but then when he was struggling to establish his political leadership, we are fighting against China. Now, in the war, we cannot say China is 5,000 living civilization. That's why this is not the time that Nehru has dealt with discovery of India. That's what the question. That was the question. That the question is. Arun Shourie, for example, because all you were Stephanians, more intelligent than any average Indians. No, intelligent or otherwise, that is different thing. But my point is, how Shourie could write that he had virtually annihilated. His objection is that Ambedkar statue always carrying a book into an arm, that constitution. He never claimed, as Justice Lokur said just now, he never claimed to have drafted constitution alone. He has recognized Allah the Krishna Samayar, for example, he was brought on the stretcher and he was asked what is to be done, and whatever he used to say, that is to be dictated. My question is, once Ambedkar refused to accept Gandhi's leadership, polemically, Ambedkar was left with no alternative to criticize Gandhi, lock, stock and barrel. From that perspective, I am saying Ambedkar was justifiable. Now, one thing I would just mention to you, how Gandhiji irritated Ambedkar. When they first met before Pune Pact in Manipur, first of all, Gandhiji neglected because he was too great a man. Okay? Now, Ambedkar just stepped down. Some people said, Bapuji, Ambedkar is going. Till then, Gandhiji was not knowing whether Ambedkar was scheduled caste. Because name Ambedkar is deceptive. Okay? Now, when he said to Ambedkar, Mr. Ambedkar, I started working for the untouchables before you were born. This comment was unreasonable. What Ambedkar retorted, Mr. Gandhi, it is not my fault that you were born before me. That's why the question is, you take it as a polemical debate. Second point is about the centralization I spoke. But Gandhi-Ambedkar leadership, it was, people have written about it, it was essentially a conflict of leadership. Not that he rejected. Now, there are many things in Gandhism, he has called Gandhi age is the dark age. So, Gandhiji clear cut he has written, I do not know the origin of the caste system, nor do I want to know. I do not believe in interdining and intercaste marriages. Gandhi changed and evolved over a period of time, but let us not forget the fact, Dr. Tharoor, Ambedkar was one of the external force that compelled Gandhiji to change.
Okay. Yes, the gentleman in the middle of the row. Yeah, you got the mic. Go ahead.
A very good evening to all the panelists. And Sir Tharoor, I'm a biggest fan of yours.
Thank you.
My name is Yuvraj Singh Thakur, and I'm from the Devbhoomi, Himachal Pradesh, and the mushroom city, Solan. Sir, I have a question to you that you always and your party advocates the idea of inclusive India. Of course, you have compared India to be a thali, comprising of different vegetables and nutrients that are essential for one man. And on the other hand, what today we witness is the rise in the religious extremism. And Dr. Ambedkar himself has mentioned many things about religious extremism, be it Hinduism or Islam for that matter. So, sir, I just would like to ask you, despite of the fact that I'm carrying all your written books from Solan to Delhi right now inside my bag, sir, to get your sign. So, sir, I just want to ask you that how far is our idea of inclusive India is in agreement with the ongoing religious extremism that is certainly very much disastrous for building a strong and a strengthened nation that is Bharat or the India?
No, look, I mean, obviously, the entire notion of inclusive India treats all religious communities as the same, as having the same rights in our society and under our constitution. Whereas what you call religious extremism is actually the majoritarianism of those who have chosen to define people of the Hindu faith as a political majority in this country. Whereas, in fact, as Dr. Ambedkar pointed out, they are a communal majority, but they need not be a political majority. Once you start organizing your politics, you should have political differences within communities. But this religious extremism, which is also a political tactic to group a large portion of the largest community behind one particular set of political principles, helps them to win elections. And that's a different view of India. Because either you believe that India, as Dr. Ambedkar did, is a place where everyone has equal rights, or you believe that India is a land particularly of one set of people who are the original people of this land as they see it, and that everybody else here of any other faith is either a guest or an interloper, a bandit. I mean, that's the kind of attitude that they have towards the notion of what India is all about. So obviously the two are completely incompatible. You have two different and incompatible ideas of India that are being nurtured in these two political extremes. So I think those who argue for an inclusive India cannot accept the idea, to call it bluntly, of Hindutva India. And similarly, those who believe that India is a pristine Hindu land that others have invaded and therefore don't deserve a place in, they will never accept our notion that everybody is equal and everybody who's contributed to this society and this polity has equal rights in it. And those are two completely irreconcilable worldviews in my view. Thank you very much. Okay, that'll have to be the last question. I'm getting signals to oh my word, we haven't heard from a lady yet. Okay, you got the mic, well then pass it to the lady there and then we'll wrap up. Go ahead.
Sir, my name is Aditya Gill and it's an honor to be in front of three illustrious Stephanians. But sir, I also come from the other side of the road, Hindu College.
Our commiserations.
Sir, my question is to Justice Lokur, sir. Sir, Ambedkar has always supported the idea of uniform civil code. And the recent Law Commission report said that it is neither a necessity or not a requirement. So sir, how do you see that uniform civil code should come in the current context of the country?
I'm glad you gave him that question and not me.
Yeah, you see, the directive principles of state policy do mention a uniform civil code, right? But it's been about 70 years and there has been no progress on that. Initially, there was the idea of the Hindu Code Bill, which Dr. Mungekar had mentioned, and which eventually led to the resignation of Dr. Ambedkar from the cabinet. So really, you know, these kind of issues, when you're dealing with religion, you know, or a uniform civil code, rather than being legal, you know, it becomes more emotional, right? That's why there was this opposition to the Hindu Code Bill. But now it's gone, you know, very much forward from what was there in the 1950s. So I don't know, perhaps it's a matter of political will. Perhaps it's a matter of getting over the, you know, emotional aspects of people and, you know, their adherence to religion and how they understand religion, which, of course, it's there in the directive principles. Maybe one day it will come about, maybe it may not. I don't know.
We give the mic to the lady there. You got it? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. And sorry, I'm a little impatient because I have to rush. I actually am a social psychologist, and I've been thinking a lot about intergroup relations in India. And it seems like constitutional principles work in principle, but they don't work in practice, partly because it doesn't really acknowledge the fact that India is partly a collectivistic country with low relational mobility, which means that when culture is low relational mobility, it usually supports anti-democratic ideology according to some like socio-ecological research, which means that if these principles, which originated in the West and originating in individualistic culture, need to be altered to be implemented with respect to the Indian culture, and also acknowledge that social groups naturally constructed in such a way that they favor people within their group and there is dominance. So the inequality will be constructed in such a way that people who are dominant will choose to be dominant intellectually as well by using these principles to either gain prestige or, you know, in other ways through power. So like maybe we need a paradigm shift when we are looking at social policy to actually change these things on ground. Say, for example, when you're looking at, say, something like building a well, right? And you know that those things are influenced by caste discrimination, but that water policy does not really take into account how socially the problem of caste can be changed in the village, which can also be done scientifically completely. Like just as an RCT is done, you can think about how these dynamics can change socially, right? Using science, established science. So I feel like the whole paradigm needs to shift from an intellectual discussion to a policy problem, which is not really hard to do, I think, but we're kind of like stuck somewhere. It's just like...
Let me let Karuna respond to that, please.
Well, beginning from the end, you said something about how it can't be an intellectual discussion, it must be a policy problem. And it would be a particularly poor policy, I think, that didn't take any intellectualism into its ambit, wouldn't it? But I think some of what you said is well taken, which is when you're saying, perhaps what I gleaned from what you said is that constitutionalism speaks of individual rights, and there are lots of people who don't have a voice, who aren't consulted. And P. Sainath wrote a very vivid story about a well. And there was some money and given to a particular government officer, government organization. And they constructed a road. Now, there wasn't corruption in constructing the road. There was a proper pakka road. It was going somewhere, and then he walked down this path. And there was one house at the end of the village. So he said, well, okay, well, at least this one house is being served by it. And so he talked to the people, and he said, are you glad that this road has been constructed? And they said, the road's fine, but we wish we had a well. So, yes, I think a fundamental point of policy and rights and intellectualism when it comes into these areas is talk to the people who are affected, ask, and build channels of speech that feedback.
Who has the mic? Because I'm afraid lots of hands have gone up. We don't have a lot of time. And the young lady handing out the mic has given it to somebody. Yes, sir.
I hope that helps. Hi, I'm Nasir Abdullah, and I was a year behind you in college, but many years behind you in your academic abilities. I did history honors, which is still a mystery, but that's okay, I hope. So yeah, I just want you to know this is really an observation, and I will make it short so we don't hold up everybody. About 21 years ago or 22 years ago, you were at the Nehru Center in London, and I was there. And you had actually given a talk about all kinds of things, wonderful stuff. And the one thing that I remembered you speaking about was when you were in college, you went to interview the Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi. And you said you were about to head out of the college and you had a jhola and you had a tape recorder with 11 of the buttons on it.
I had a friend with a jhola and a tape recorder in it, yeah. And no one checked it. No
Yes.
security.
And your friend also dropped by and you asked him to join you to interview the Prime Minister. And you went in, they didn't even actually check your bag to see what you were carrying. And nowadays, they check you even if you don't have anything. So I was really thinking about those wonderful days that you talked about. The youngsters here would not know very much about it because you were born with all this ye dikhao, wo dikhao, so I just wanted you to know I have the memory of that. It was a beautiful a memory for me. And I'm also looking forward to reading the book. I'm not much of a reader, but knowing you, it'll be an honor to read your book. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasser. No, that is a true story. It's got nothing to do with Ambedkar particularly, but it's a great story because I still remember vividly going to Parliament House because having come back as an MP and seeing all the security and the gates and the checks and the passes and the badges, it was such a different world. And back in 1975 when I interviewed Mrs. Gandhi, you could walk in, anyone would walk in, you ask for directions. The security cheerfully pointed out the Prime Minister's office. I went there was kind of a cheerful shambles raining as all sorts of people walking in and out. And the private secretary was, I remember, quite openly cracking jokes about the movie Andhi, which had an actress playing someone who resembled the Prime Minister. And then when the information advisor stuck his head out to the Prime Minister's office and called my name, I said, do you mind if my friend joins me? And he said, why not? And so my friend with his jhola and his tape recorder came in, and at no point had anyone ever checked that jhola, which could have been carrying anything but a tape recorder, but it was, and that's how we did. So I still have a photograph of that extraordinary occasion. But those days are long gone, sadly. And when you think that the very same Prime Minister whom I'd had that encounter with was assassinated 9 years later, it's really an indication of how much the odds have changed against ever returning to that kind of innocence. Sir, you had a question. Could we have the mic for this gentleman?
Can I ask a question on Ambedkar, sir? There.
Oh, you all right?
Yeah, here, sir.
Somebody's got the mic already, and we'll get the next mic. All right, go ahead. No, the gentleman with a mic, and another gentleman with a mic, and then we've got two. My God.
I'll keep it very quick.
Okay, I do have to wrap up. I'm getting signals from the back that we have to close.
A very broad question on Ambedkar, sir, to the panel in a very broad nature. What do you think about the idea of Ambedkar at the later age of his life when he said that we should all convert to Buddhism? A person of the intellect and ability of Ambedkar proposing to get out of the psychological, social and political religious dimensions of the religion, or whatever you may call loosely Hinduism, to get into another religion, if it may be called so. So what are the natures of that transition? What is the logical end of that transition if we, as a subcontinent, make it? Are we a Buddhist country in the idealistic idea of Ambedkar? Like 50 years from now, 100 years from now?
Dr. Mungika, would you like to take that?
See, the question is, Ambedkar has mentioned his desire to convert in 1936 Jatpat Todak Mandal speech, that annihilation of caste. By the way, academics may be aware that the word annihilation is used in the entire discourse on caste system, first and the last time only by Ambedkar. Because there is no way to reform the caste. Reforming caste is absolutely adjusting and compromising with caste. Caste needs to be destroyed as entity. And there in fact, that was one of the points which absolutely. And that is what the next time when Gandhiji wrote in Harijan, what he wrote, Ambedkar is challenge to Hinduism. And also he has written that Ambedkar would be the last person to allow himself to be forgotten. This is the only bad comment or rather harsh comment Gandhiji has used against Ambedkar. Otherwise, he never. The question is, after 1935, Evola conference, where he said that though I am born Hindu, I shall die not Hindu. 21 years Ambedkar waited for Hindus taking reforms in the Hindu social order. Ambedkar's followers unfortunately misunderstand that Ambedkar was against Brahmins. It was not the case. Ambedkar was against Brahminism. It's an attitude. And an attitude of monopolizing the entire power. I don't want to go into the logistics now. I have got the entire statistics on my computer. There are 4% Brahmins in the country today, right from judiciary till 600 collectors, till vice chancellors of 600 universities, till top-ranking policemen, till your all defense forces, everything, even NGOs, even in corruption for that matter, they are numerically larger. Because they wanted to mention their proportion there also. My point is, Ambedkar ultimately accepted Buddhism, and you mentioned that in your Hinduism, he thoroughly understood Hinduism. But let me ask you one simple question. You means not only to you, to you all. What is the place of Buddha in Hinduism? In the entire 4,000-year-old Indian history, is there any person on par with Buddha? That his words became the philosophy without having single word written in those days. All Buddhist scriptures were written 300 years after Buddha's Mahaparinirvan. The question is, when he was writing or drafting the Indian Constitution, he was writing simultaneously Buddha and his Dhamma. And you have mentioned that reconstruction of Russell and reconstruction of society, and he has written critique of Russell. Russell wrote, "Why am I not Christian?" You wrote, "Why am I Hindu?" And I perfectly justify that. Because 78% population Hindu, and that is the reason that we are not able to distinguish between Hinduism and Hindutva, and that is the price we are paying. The question is, Buddhism he accepted because Buddhism was supposed to give the cultural foundation to Indian nationalism. Nationalism is just abstract thing. Nation, nationality and nationalism, they are three different phenomena. Nationality doesn't require geographical territory. Nation does require. Nationalism just a feeling. But nationalism develops into nation in form of the state when it has got specific geographical territory. The question is, Ambedkar was drafting Buddha and his Dhamma as a gospel, just like Quran or just like Bible. Because ordinary people, okay, I'm sorry to say, I was totally de-religious during my 20s and 30s. Now I accept that religion is required by the people. I don't require. But people have freedom to, if I have got freedom not to accept any religion, millions of people in the country have freedom to accept the religion. That is the only way of coexistence. Ambedkar's conversion to Buddhism, and he categorically mentioned, I'm accepting Buddhism. This is the greatest thing and great service he has done to the Indian nation and Hindus particularly. He has used the word Hindu imperialism. It's not the case. Don't smile. In the case that Hindu imperialism, today what is happening? It is imperialism. Okay? My only point is, he said, I don't want to remain in the history of India as a destroyer of the culture. And that is why I accepted the religion of this Indian origin. That's why both the Sikhs, from point of nationalistic perspective, from point of view of giving the cultural foundation, Buddhism is moral foundation of Indian nationalism. And that is why he secured all the three objectives. Okay? That is the cultural foundation, moral foundation, and then Indian origin and Indian ethos. I am Indian. Only Ambedkar said, I am the Indian first and the Indian last. That was Ambedkar's contribution to the modern Indian nation building. Thank you very much.
Okay, then the last question, we really have to wrap up. Sir.
This is for you, Dr. Tharoor.
Yes.
Did Dr. Ambedkar envisage the present situation where each state in India, which is ruled by a political party, state party, is now concentrating power in family? Each one is developing an entire system so that father to son, all the regional parties. How to deal with that?
Well, Dr. Ambedkar has written on the problems of linguistic states, but he didn't anticipate family inheritance, I must say. As somebody who was never very convinced by the logic of the caste system, he would not have accepted the inheritance principle anyway in politics or in anything else. So I can tell you that though he has not written about it, I think it's a fairly safe assumption that he would have disapproved and would have been quite critical of the idea that political leadership should go through inheritance rather than through election or other form of merit. But this is, surmise. He has not written about this particular aspect. But his thoughts on linguistic states are very interesting and far-reaching as well, which I would recommend you look at. But let me thank once again our wonderful panel. They've been very patient in saying this. It's been a rich and rewarding discussion.
नमस्कार, मैं हूं मानक गुप्ता। अगर आपको हमारा ये वीडियो पसंद आया हो तो इसे लाइक और शेयर जरूर करें और हां, हमें सब्सक्राइब और फॉलो करना ना भूलें ताकि आप देश और दुनिया की कोई खबर मिस ना करें। तो जुड़े रहिए हमारे साथ और देखते रहिए News24।